Hello everybody and welcome back, and in the previous tutorials we finished setting up our Kali Linux machine and setting up our ethical hacking environment, and we are almost ready to start learning the methods and the attacks of hackers. But before we do that, I need to introduce you to some of the networking terms and some of the ethical hacking terms that you need to know in order to be able to follow with this course. These are just some of the basic terms that you all probably already know, but just in case we'll cover them shortly, one by one. So in this part 1 we will cover only networking terms, and in the next part we will cover the ethical hacking terms. So let's start off with the basic one, which is TCP/IP model. Well, TCP/IP model basically uses client-server model of communication in which a user or a machine, for example, is provided a service like sending a web page by another computer in the network. So there are 7 layers of this module, and they go in order as a physical layer, data layer, network layer, transport layer, session layer, presentation layer, and the last one is application layer. So the next thing we need to cover is IP addresses, and I already ran the command ifconfig, which we covered before, and you can see that here I have 2 interfaces, the WLO interface and the NO1 interface. They both, if they were both were to be connected to the internet, they would both have different IP addresses, local IP addresses. Now I'm connected over the wireless card interface, which is WLO1, and my IPv4 address is 192.168.1.15. So basically what an IP address is a numerical number or label that is used to identify the machine on the internet, and also used as a location addressing. There are 2 types of IP addresses, IPv4 and IPv6. IPv4 is mostly used over IPv6. Now there is also one thing you should differentiate, which is the local IP address and global IP address. The local IP address is the IP address that you see right here, which is 192.168.1.15, and it is only usable on this local network, which basically means if you were to type here this IPv4 address in your, for example, Firefox or Google Chrome, you won't be able to connect to me, because this is a local IP address and it only works on local network. Now the global IP address is used by a router to communicate with the entire internet. For example, you can find out what your global IP address is by typing in the Google, "What is my IP?" Just click on the first link and it will show you what your global IP address is. The next thing you should cover is the MAC address. The MAC address, or Media Access Control, is address, basically a physical address given to a network adapter when it is manufactured. You can find out what your MAC address is by typing in the same command, which is ifconfig, which will also show you the different MAC addresses for all your interfaces, for all your network interfaces. Now here we can see this is the MAC address of my wireless interface. It is right here. And my other network interface, which is not connected to the internet at the moment, has this MAC address. It is a physical MAC address, and it is also a unique MAC address. It is hardwired or hard-coded onto your computer's network interface card. The next thing are routers. Well, routers, we all have them at our own home. It is a common device. We usually call it a router, but it is actually a piece of network hardware that allows communication between your local home network and the internet. It is also a layer of protection for your local machines. The next thing you should know are TCP and UDP protocols. Those are the most known protocols and the most basic protocols. They're used basically for communication, and they are, well, basically used to establish a connection between one computer and another computer. For example, TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol. It is different than UDP because it is a connection-oriented protocol, while as UDP is a connectionless protocol, which means that in TCP there is something called a three-way handshake, which means that the two computers have to agree that the message came whole from one computer to another before sending the next packet. While in the UDP protocol, packets are just thrown at the other machine, and it doesn't matter if some of those packets is malfunctioned or didn't even get there. The machine will just start sending other packets to the other computer. UDP is mostly used for streaming, or basically for your Skype calls, for example, while TCP is used to transfer packets that are important to go in a certain way. They're all labeled, those packets are labeled with different numbers, so that when one machine sends to the other machine a program or a file, it should all come in order that follows those numbers. So basically for the TCP there is a guarantee that the data transfer remains intact and arrives in the same order in which it was sent. While in the UDP it's not like that. Now the next is the ARP protocol, which stands for the Address Resolution Protocol. It is a communication protocol used for discovering the link layer address, such as MAC address, associated with a given internet layer address. Now this mapping is a critical function in the Internet Protocol suite. It basically has two types of ARP protocols, the request type and the reply type. The request type requests a certain MAC address of a machine of which it knows the IP address and just wants to find out what its MAC address is, and the reply is the reply sent by that machine which says, hey, I am 192.168.1.5 and this is my MAC address, for example. That is ARP protocol. It is used for ARP spoofing in man-in-the-middle attacks, which we will be covering later on. And there are a bunch of other protocols that you should check out if you don't know what they do, such as FTP, TFTP, SMTP, ICMP, and many more. But what more important protocols for us are the HTTP and HTTPS protocols. Now, some of you might be asking what is the difference between those two. Well, basically, in the HTTP protocol, there is no data encryption implemented, and all of your, for example, if you're visiting an HTTP site and you're putting in a username and password there, it can be seen in a plain text by anyone that is interfering with the connection between you and that website, for example. As in the HTTPS, there is the addition S, as you can see, which stands for SSL or TLS, which is Secure Sockets Layer, Transport Layer Security, which basically encrypts your data and doesn't allow anyone who is interfering with the connection to see your data in plain text. They're all encrypted and hard to decrypt. For example, if there are some SSL vulnerabilities out there, that's why most of the websites, HTTP websites nowadays, use TLS. There are 3 versions of TLS, I believe, 1, 2, and 3, and they are secure. And the last thing that you need to know is the DNS, which basically you use all day every time you visit a website. It is useful for us humans because we cannot remember numbers that well as we can remember words. So for example, if you want to visit facebook.com, without DNS you would need to know the Facebook's IP address, and you would always type in the Google search bar instead of facebook.com, you would just type here the number or the IP address of Facebook. Now DNS allows us to instead of the IP address, remember just the name, and then it translates the name into the IP address. It is a very important thing in the networking protocols, and it is also one of the main things to attack. We will be doing the DNS attacks later on as we go with the course. Now the DHCP is basically only used for giving you the IPv address. Mostly it is also pre-built into your router, and every time you connect to the internet it basically just gives you an available IPv4 address. So that's about it from these networking terms. You should all learn more about them if you want to. I won't be covering this, is not a networking course. You should just search them up on the Google and basically just read more about them if you want to. For now on, this will be enough, and in the next lecture we will cover some of the ethical hacking terms that you also need to know in order to follow the course, and I hope I see you there, and take care.